This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. I think most of us agree that we have some serious transportation concerns in the Lower Mainland. Most of us agree that we probably need some bridges, we need some roads without potholes, we need some buses, maybe a subway, better yet, some light rail, and so on. But big questions remain. Who's supposed to pay for all this? How and when and why? The who is very important because we had the mayor of North Van on this show a couple months ago to talk about the plebiscite, and at that time, for me, it was just kind of informational and interesting, and I was sort of going along with it until I started to think about it, read more about it, and then we had Jordan Bateman on from Canadian Taxpayers, and by then I'd been converted to a solid no guy. So we've had both sides, as Judy Collins would say, on, but now let us focus entirely on one of my all-time favorite corporations, TransClunk, and nobody, I think I'm safe in saying this, nobody in local journalism has covered the TransLink file as thoroughly and for as long as Bob MACKIN, who you can read regularly in the Vancouver Courier, in the Tyee, in the Georgia Straight. He probably hands out little pamphlets on the corner of a street, and you can see him on radio and television as a guest quite often, deservedly so. Bob, even today, the Courier had a piece of yours about disclosure. Just tell us about that.
Well, the provincial government on February 12th, the cabinet set the rules for the plebiscite. They had a cabinet order, which was signed by the Lieutenant Governor. This is quite regular, called the Order in Council. And within that, they set the rules of the dates for the plebiscite, who can vote in it, how you can register to vote. Within that cabinet order, however, there's nothing, no rules whatsoever about campaign finance. We just had a civic election in Vancouver back in November where one of the big issues was transparency and big money in politics, yes, of which developers, which unions are putting money into political parties to gain influence so that they can hopefully get better contracts, get better rezoning for their buildings, whatever they want when the party that they supported got reelected or elected. That was a big issue back then. Well, now the provincial government has let the floodgates open, that this campaign is going to be a Wild West campaign. There will be no rules for any of the groups that are involved in the campaign to register as a third-party sponsor. There will be no rules for the Yes campaign or No campaign to register with the government and give us a report afterwards about how much money they raised and who gave them the money to help them advertise their positions during the campaign.
What's the big number? Is 7.5 million, billion, trillion? What is it? What's the big number?
$7.5 billion is the wish list for the Mayor's Council. Now, $2.5 billion over 10 years is what they hope to raise if this 0.5% sales tax increase passes. And now they're hoping that it passes, then they can go to Ottawa and Victoria with their hands out and say to
match the funds.
To Christy Clark, to Stephen Harper, please put more money into this whole plan.
So we've basically got Jordan Bateman of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation running with the No campaign, and Bateman has said openly and often, we'll spend roughly $40,000 on our version, okay? But we don't know what the Yes campaign will spend. We don't know how much money the City of Vancouver, the City of Surrey, or all the other municipalities may spend. And what we really don't know is how much the large corporations who will benefit, like Lanolin, one of my other favorite companies, along with Bombardier, which is a corrupt, excuse me, I don't want to get sued, but I mean, has shown many signs of corruption because they've been fined millions and millions of dollars worldwide.
Well, SNC-Lavalin is a company that wants the business. They want to build the Broadway subway.
Yes.
They haven't been public about it yet, but they have been involved in the planning stages up until now. They're the company that runs the Canada Line. They built the Canada Line.
Yes.
They're the company that is building the Evergreen Line, which is having some of its own challenges now.
Late in delivery.
The government told us that summer 2016, that's off the table. Now fall 2016, they still claim it's on budget, but of course we hear that so often here in British Columbia, on time, on budget, that it's almost a cliche. So you got this company based in Montreal, which has made worldwide headlines for all the wrong reasons.
Yes.
One of its former CEOs, Pierre Duhaime himself, is charged and is waiting trial. And there's the situation with the McGill University Hospital, the $1.3 billion super hospital in Montreal, the $22.5 billion of kickbacks that the police say SNC-Lavalin executives were involved in. This is a company whose various divisions, including some based in Vancouver, were on a very long list of SNC-Lavalin subsidiaries that were banned from getting any World Bank development work for 10 years back in 2013. This is a company which counts British Columbia as a very key market. It's trying to clean itself up. Its new CEO, Bob Card, has said all the right things, although said some interesting things last fall about how the company is facing a situation where if it is charged with corruption, then this company may cease to exist.
So the question, Bob MACKIN, is why should someone in Burnaby care? And the answer is because Lavalin could be putting money into the Yes campaign, and we'd never know about it.
Exactly.
Because there are no rules.
There are no rules here, and we don't know who's putting in money one way or another. All we know of is that there's about $4 million that TransLink has put into the Mayor's Council. And even that, I talked to Greg Moore, the mayor of Port Coquitlam. He says that it's not finalized yet. And he says that they are counting on in-kind contributions from member municipalities. Well, that's also taxpayer time and money that they're hoping to get.
In kind. Like, don't do your regular work, work entirely for the yes vote for the next 3 months.
And the City of Vancouver, Vancouver City Hall, they've seconded various bureaucrats and people in the communications department to work for the next couple or 3 months on this project to try to convince the public to vote yes in this mail-in ballot.
Okay, so now we had this Three Stooges comedy of errors of let's fire the CEO, and firing him was done so badly that it'll cost us twice as much to fire him and keep him on and pay for his dog and his cat and Lord knows what else. But to me, that was all a diversion, because the real issue, and just correct me if I'm wrong, Bob, TransClonk has over 400 employees in the 6 figures.
Yeah, they have a very large base of managers. They're very top-heavy in management.
Yes.
This is a company that Ian Jarvis, if he was such a bad executive for them to decide to get rid of, why didn't they get rid of him a while ago? I mean, here's a fellow who was with the company and still is with the company, at least till next year, from the early days as essentially the bean counter, the chief financial officer. And we've seen a lot of problems along the way. There was a Comptroller General's report from 2012 that looked at TransLink, and it, in one section on procurement, showed that they were not following their own rules of procurement. They were spending about $300 million in that year, in 2011, 2012 era, and they were not following the proper rules of fairness for contracts. They were not properly vetting bidders for the lowest price. They were actually signing contracts after the work had been delivered. This is for goods and services and construction. And there was an opportunity for them, if they wanted to ever get rid of Ian Jarvis, to get rid of him over that, because procurement is something I look at in various municipal halls. That's what they're spending our money to buy things, and they should be looking out for every single dollar.
Is it true that TransLink has 6 different boards?
There's 6 different boards. They have had some amalgamation on some of the other matters in recent times, but the key boards really are the Mayor's Council and the Board of Directors. The Board of Directors, it's appointed by the province with some input now from the Mayor's Council. This Board of Directors is unelected, and it does not meet in public. Now, this is a public corporation that spends
doesn't meet in public.
$1.43 billion a year.
And you never know what they're doing.
They have taxation authority. About 2/3 of that every year is through taxation, through gas tax, through property tax. There's the old saying, no representation without, or no taxation without representation.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know why they can't open the doors and let the public in to watch, or even webcast it. I mean, this is, sure, they can do like any city council, go in camera for sensitive matters of labor and contracts.
Yeah.
That's fine. But why can't they have regular open meetings for us to watch and see how they make their decisions, what they discuss, and how they come together? Because the only thing they do now is, before they do have their meetings, they have a period of time in which they invite the public to come and ask them some questions or give them some thoughts and ideas. But then after that, the public is shooed out,
yes,
and these people go behind closed doors, and we don't know exactly what goes on behind closed doors.
Take a wild shot. I know you're not going line by line in their books, but could you just take a really wild shot? Of the 400 employees who make $100,000 or more, how many do you think we could really live with? 30?
Good question.
50?
I haven't done that kind of analysis, but
Yeah.
I did look at some of the
Yes.
figures.
Yeah.
Bob Patton is their head of communications.
Yes.
He makes about $311,000 a year. And if you compare that to some others in government, Penny Ballum is the city manager of Vancouver, and of
Yes.
course, a lot of people criticize her for the work, but she has a very big responsibility
Yes.
as the city manager running
course.
City Hall, essentially.
And she makes?
About $330,000.
Yeah.
So you have the head of communications for this one public body,
Yes.
and you who makes almost as much as the head of the bureaucracy for one of the biggest cities in Canada. That doesn't make sense to me.
In terms of procurements and supplies and so on, I got an email after the Bateman show that we did 2 weeks back, and the emailer said, I deliver things to Transclonc regularly, and I'm often sitting there 4 hours trying to get my truck unloaded, and I say to the people at the dock, look, this is costing money, and they fall down laughing, the writer says, and they go, we have lots of that, don't worry. I mean, what kind of a culture is that?
You see, we've got a problem here with TransLink. We
Yes.
have every day, it's the public body that's entrusted with moving the city, essentially. Not everyone has a car. A lot of people have to take public transit because of affordability. It's what helps the lower income people get around every day. It's also a great way to get around some days, to take the C-Bus, to take the SkyTrain. It fulfills its mandate a lot of the time.
So we have less than a minute left, Bob. You're like me. I think you're like everybody. We need transportation fixes and things and toys and movement and so on. We all agree on that. But do we agree that TransLink is the body to trust to run these things?
Exactly. Any city that properly functions needs an effective and efficient transit system. I've traveled around the world,
Yes.
seen some great ones, and TransLink has the potential to be much better than it is today, but this plebiscite is the one way where the public can decide its future.
We're going to take a little breather. Your chance to send us a note, an email at davidberner.com, and the chance for these lovely people who support our program to say hello here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. And we'll just take a breather, and I'll get out my compass card and see if it still works. This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. Okay, thank you. Okay, Bob MACKIN, a local journalist writing for the Courier, the Tyee, Georgia Strait, and others. Compass card, I mentioned just as we went to the break. Will this thing ever get fixed? Shouldn't this be a simple thing? Don't people know how to create these systems and have them work on the first day?
That's the way it should have been. It should have been ready and happening back in 2013, but now here we are in 2015. They're still testing. It looks like they may have something to tell us later in the year. It's being tested, especially during the spring and into the summer with the university students. This is a project that came about to stop the fare evasion. It was a project to start helping platform security. It had some good intentions.
To stop fare evasion. This is the company that started a SkyTrain system where you didn't have to pay. It's the only system in the world with the honor system. It's ludicrous.
Well, it came to a point where they had to realize that they had to get revenue from wherever they could, and they couldn't keep on raising the gas tax, so they started looking at this. Kevin Falcon was the finance minister at the time. He put them under pressure to get this kind of system. When they announced it, it was going to be $100 million. The official number now is $194 million. They're playing fast and loose with the figures. I mean, I went back and looked at the original news release from April 2009. It said this project was going to be $100 million. Well, now they're saying $194 million. They say it should have been $171 million. This is something that really cries out for the Auditor General to look at because of the way this all came about. Interestingly enough, the company that got this contract, Cubic, out of San Diego, they hired Ken Dobell as their lobbyist back in 2007 in order to get this contract. Ken Dobell, of course, we know him from being the right-hand man to Gordon Campbell when he was mayor and Gordon Campbell when he was the premier. So Ken Dobell was also the founding CEO of TransLink way back in 1999. And interestingly enough, they've hired another lobbyist. Because this project is costing way too much and there's must be worries by the company that there could be a lawsuit like in Chicago against them, or that maybe they might need to renegotiate this contract. I don't know because Cubic isn't wanting to talk to me at all about this or answer my questions. They've hired a woman named Alicia Stewart as their lobbyist to go and talk to Transport Minister Todd Stone and other officials. She was the NDP appointee to run the project to build the Millennium Line back in the 1990s and to also run the West Coast Express. She was not there on opening day, but because when the Liberals came to power, they got rid of her, gave her over a $400,000 golden parachute. She eventually went to work for Bombardier as a vice president, and in recent years she's been a bid specialist and lobbyist. She's done work on projects for SNC-Lavalin in Ottawa where they're building light rail. She's done work for the City of Edmonton, got a $350,000 contract to help promote City of Edmonton's aspirations to build a light rail system. And back in 2013, she got an $80,000 no-bid contract from TransLink to push or to put together the plan for the regional transportation plan. This is someone who seems to have an expertise in public transit and also has a way to get involved with big billion and multi-billion-dollar projects.
She has an expertise in getting good gigs.
Now she seems to be the person to come out to put the fires out for Cubic with the provincial government. Her lobbying registration says she's registered to lobby for Cubic until May 31st, which just happens to be a couple days after the end of the mail-in plebiscite for TransLink.
We've had two recent studies of various aspects of TransLink. One was the SkyTrain outages, and that report came in just last July. And then the 2012 Comptroller General's report on TransLink. What did these two reports tell us?
Well, the report on the July outages, that was July 17th and 21st of last year. The report came out in October. The good news of that report was that the safety systems worked. That when they lost power on the TransLink, on the SkyTrain system, the trains stopped as they should. Nobody was injured, and there was no major damage to any systems. Great. But the problem was you had an aging system which had not been properly maintained for a number of years and the proper investments not made by those in charge. And again, why didn't the board of TransLink decide at the time to get rid of Ian Jarvis then? They had an opportunity. If they really wanted to get rid of him, this report would have told them. It also told us some unsettling things, that there were only about 40 or so SkyTrain attendants and supervisors on the entire system. Miles
and miles and miles, kilometers of this stuff,
So no wonder they had the situation where people were trapped inside the SkyTrains between stations, and they didn't have proper communication. They weren't getting announcements. So of course people are going to try to crawl their way out and open the doors, and that's what happened. And that's another situation that report pointed to, was the lack of communication, the lack of people involved. They even said that there was a safety situation,
But you also pinpointed something also very interesting. Anybody running any large business activity diarizes into the future and says, March of 2010, maintenance. April of 2012, maintenance. You know, every 6 months you got to do these things. Do they lack these systems? Do they not remind themselves that they have to clean up?
Again, that goes back to the questions we have about management. That report said that $70 million of investments need to be made to fix these situations,
yes.
For example, put proper platform surveillance cameras in. There apparently are not proper platform surveillance cameras in SkyTrain stations, and upgrade computer systems. Of course, these two incidents happened in many ways because of incompetence. You had a situation on the second one where you had a worker during business hours, during service hours,
yes.
doing electrical maintenance work that could have been done after hours when the system's not working, doing this electrical work to prepare for the integration of the Millennium Line with the Evergreen Line, which is under construction.
Right.
And the other one was a computer card, a malfunction.
What did the Comptroller General's report say about the organization?
Back in 2012, it just said the organization was trying to maximize its abilities, trying to maximize its resources. It said its financial forecasts were a little bit too conservative. And of course, as I talked about earlier, the situation with procurement, that this organization, which was only going to be spending more money in future years and wanting to spend more money in future years, was not properly shepherding the dollars that belong to the public. Speaking of
dollars, is it true that Transclunk spends over $1 million a year on an empty building near Edmonds?
Yeah, that's the building that was from back in the day when they were building SkyTrain cars,
yes.
The Bombardier building, and that building has stayed empty for much of that time, and they've had to pay to various landlords who have flipped it back and forth. Insurance and
guards
heating and lighting.
Why do we do this? Why are we paying for an empty building? What is that doing for us as taxpayers?
That's a good question. TransLink hasn't properly communicated that for us. I mean, these big corporations, big public bodies, often do have land reserves or extra buildings.
Right.
But when it gets to be a company like TransLink, which is now under the microscope, you've got to wonder why they're keeping hold of these assets and why they're not trying to maximize every single dollar before they come back to the public and ask for more money. That's the situation.
You know, one of the gods of the free enterprise world in the last 30 years is Jack Welch, you know, from among other places, GE. But what he was most famous for was lean and mean. I mean, he'd walk into a new corporation and fire half the people. At all levels, you know, and he would take an empty building and just get rid of it. It's gone. Maybe we need a guy like that. I mean, I'm not a fan of Jack Welch like everybody else in free enterprise is, but maybe we need that kind of a guy who's almost ruthless and says, look, this is public money we're messing with.
I think that the problem with TransLink has been too many cooks.
Yes.
I remember covering back in the 1990s the hearings that went on in various municipalities. Back then I was working at the Richmond News, and the Traveling Roadshow with George Puel, who was then Vancouver City Councillor.
Yes. King George, I labeled him.
He was leading the charge. It was the idea was to take BC Transit, take the power out of Victoria's hands, and put it into local government hands, make it part of GVRD, the Greater Vancouver Regional District, now known as Metro Vancouver. A well-meaning idea to get it off the island, out of the NDP's grasp back when they were in power, and put it in the power of local politicians, and make it put it into the power of essentially people here in Vancouver, because those politicians were democratically elected to be in their councils. Great idea. Although it looked more like, to some people, it was just the NDP government offloading costs from provincial books onto municipal books and regional books.
Yes.
And good idea at the time for some, but there's been this tug of war ever since that Metro Vancouver got it. They went back to the provincial government, when the Liberals got in charge, shortly after the Liberals got in charge, of course, there was that big transit strike back in 2001. They wanted more money. And of course, you get this to and fro where the municipal politicians, regional politicians go to Victoria and say, we need more money. Then the provincial government says, well, okay, well, if you want more money, we'll have more say in how you spend the money. We'll have more power. So even when TransLink became this regional group,
yes,
the provincial government has been meddling all along, and that's why you have situations where Kevin Falcon helped impose the what would eventually became the Compass card. You've got
here's a simple fact. We just have a minute or two left. Simple fact: TransLink corporate costs jumped 40% from 2006 to 2011. 40% in corporate costs. That's indisputable.
Indisputable.
And it can't be defended. We just have a minute left. If you were king for a day, what would you do?
Well, actually, I got to give credit to Mike Smith. He's been the province. The best suggestion all along is to cancel this plebiscite for now. Put it aside. Maybe come back later.
A year or two. And let's work on TransLink.
Reform TransLink because it's not the best it can be going into this plebiscite.
Yes.
What we're going to have is a lot of spin, a lot of misinformation, a lot of angry people, a lot of disputes back and forth over the next few months, and we're not going to get the decision that perhaps we need to get. And the other part of the decision is that even after May 29th, even if it's yes, it's going to take a while to improve the transit system because they're going to then have to go to Ottawa, go to Victoria to get more money. Then they're going to have to go out and buy the buses and everything else.
We're out of time, Bob. Great. Thank you so much. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful insight. And nobody, I think, has covered the story the way you have. We're gone, folks. That's it. Next week, the secret powers of persuasion. Among other things, we will do card tricks, and we'll show you that a guy can suggest enough times that I picked the right card, or can he? Thanks for being with us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night. Good stuff.